Is the pendulum beginning to swing as far as how taboo it is to call out the all things radical trans agenda? Behind me is a group of approximately 200 people who have come out to attend a Vancouver Speaks event put on by podcaster and women's rights activist Meghan Murphy. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, reporting from Victoria. I'm going to show you what happens in there. There are speakers, including April Hutchinson, a power lifter who you've probably seen before at our special website called standwithapril.com, who was suspended for 2 years at first for speaking out about biological men in sports. More to come, but first you should know that when we have our boots on the ground to cover these important issues, sometimes it gets violent. That's why today I have a bodyguard with me to keep me safe. Thankfully, everybody's in there. We already went in and there are no counter protesters, but you just never know, and we can't bring you reports like this unless you help us out. So if you have time and the means, go to journalistdefensefund.com and chip in what you can. Let's go take a look.
So earlier this year, the Canadian state-funded media reported that Canada's intelligence agency had assessed the anti-gender movement. This is us. This is anybody who attended the 1 million march.
Now, why is it important to do these Vancouver Island Speaks events?
There's so many people on Vancouver Island that I've had the pleasure of meeting and hearing from who care deeply about this issue, who care about their kids and what their kids are being taught in school about gender and gender identity. There are families, there are working class people who are tired of being silenced and ignored by the Dave Evies of the world, who is completely entitled to ignore what his constituents are saying to the point of blocking us all on social media. And, I just want to give voice to real people and regular people and working class people and to these communities who are completely being ignored by the political class and the mainstream media.
All right, April, back in BC again. You and I last saw each other after the Conservative Party of British Columbia put forth a bill to try to make fairness in women's sports. Of course, the NDP shot that down real quick. Why was it important to come back to this province again?
Well, I'm here with Meghan and some other great speakers. We have the election coming up in a couple of months, but again, we're talking about women's rights and spaces and protecting the children, right? I'm here specifically talking about, again, protecting female sports. There's some great topics. It's just, we could talk about this every day, right? Until there's some changes in the government, right? We're going to keep speaking up. We're going to be louder and louder. And again, until there's some changes, these topics are very important. So we'll keep speaking out as much as we can.
There's a saying, follow the money. When some people are wondering, how has this ideology spread so far, so fast, so wide? What does the money say about that? You've touched on it a little bit in your presentation.
I mentioned about rich donors like Jennifer Pritzker. There's a few others in influential positions that have an impact on that. But also federal and provincial funding. That's kind of my background more that I'm familiar with. So running an arts organization, you have to write grants to the government to do certain work. And of course, it's kind of tied to these initiatives. Or you have to make statements in the grant proposal to say that you agree with what this ideology says. And I think, I can't remember how much the Liberal government gave it 2 years ago towards LGBTQ initiatives, but it was a lot of money, and now we're starting to see that translating into all sorts of arts organizations producing drag camps for kids and things like that. There's now they've got their grants and they're doing it right now. So you see how it filters out like that. Of course, the funding for the media works in a similar way. And I mentioned a lot of the pharmaceutical interests that are involved in this, and they're big funders of the media as well.
Well, speaking of David Eby blocking people, I didn't know you were blocked until tonight, but I've seen that from constituents all over. Yet he's reading letters from parents who are basically saying the attacks against trans and non-binary kids need to stop, or else maybe they're going to harm themselves.
Our government will always stand up for you to make sure that you can be who you are and you can love who you love without fear. To everyone in BC, we need to stand up together against hate. And to those people out there who are promoting that hate, The adults targeting vulnerable kids, politicians promoting hate, shame on you. We're better than that in this province. And all of us are going to stand up against it.
What do you make of that?
I don't think there are any attacks against trans kids. I think that, first of all, there's no such thing as a trans kid. I think there's just kids. When I was a kid, I didn't like girly things either, and nobody said I was a boy. I didn't think I was a boy. I just liked to play with trucks, and that was cool. I had short hair. I didn't like pink. That was cool. I was a tomboy. But if anything, these kids identifying as trans are getting celebrated and supported and treated as like having some kind of celebrity status, which encourages the trans identity. Like, I think a big reason a lot of these youth are identifying as trans because they get all this attention and all this validation and all this support, and it would make you feel really good. And no, I don't think, in this day and age, I think that we are actually quite accepting as a society, and I don't think that there is any big vendetta against anybody identifying as transgender in Canada, and I think it's weird that there's all this hysteria and hyperbole around that idea.
What do you make of the narrative that speaking out on these issues may cause these kids to commit suicide or harm themselves?
Well, first of all, I'll just start off by saying, and I've been saying this for a long time, that trans rights do not trump women's rights or little girls' rights. I shared tonight about my sexual abuse growing up. I was sexually abused by a man when I was 6 years old. Because of that abuse, I now, with these gender-neutral bathrooms, I now am forced to share a bathroom with men. So I remember when these bathrooms came out, I basically came out of the bathroom stall and there was a full-grown male standing there, and I basically instantly had post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't know what to do. I had a panic attack. And that's just one instance. It's happened many times. And so, you talk about suicide attempts. I've actually talked about my own suicide attempt and having to deal with, overcoming my own mental health issues. It's why I use sports. So now we go into the sports. I've actually used sports to help me with my mental health. And now I have to deal with men coming into my sport and taking away gold medals, podium spots, taking away years of my training now because men want to come into my spaces and my sports and take those away. So it's very one-sided. So it's very insulting that Ibby would say that, oh, well, poor trans kids, poor this and that. Well, what about women's feelings? Like, we matter. Again, the trans rights don't trump women's rights or little girls' feelings and safety.
There's a new study that's just looked into the post-operative transition, so after surgery, the suicide rate actually goes up. According to this study, 12-fold increase in suicide risk after the surgery. There's no actual hard evidence to suggest that suicide is a big risk of not affirming a child. There's a lot of comorbidities that are involved with being trans-identified. And they're also tied to high suicide rates as well. So there's been nothing really compelling to say that it's just on whether you affirm the identity or not. And there is a lot of evidence that suicide is a contagion when you talk about it like this. So it's actually pretty irresponsible for these politicians to be talking about it in that way.
What message would you like to say to the David Ebys of the world who are basically saying that parents who have concerns about gender ideology being taught to their kids or about males being in women's spaces, well, they're the bad guys and don't say anything, or else maybe these kids are going to kill themselves, basically.
What is the differential diagnosis between the first signs of desistance or regret and internalized transphobia? I would like to hear the answer to that question.
Because you're saying when you first felt regrets, you were told...
Yeah, you're struggling with internalized transphobia, Ken.
Well, you have this beautiful venue. There was no counter-protester today. Last time I covered one of these events, there was a pushback. You were canceled at the first location. And you've had some crazy things happen, even violent ones like fleeing for your life in the United States. What do you think is happening? Is the tide shifting here? Is it changing? Are you sensing that?
I think the tide is turning. I think that if we'd done this event in Victoria 3 years ago, it would have been insane. Like, I know what we faced in Vancouver. I know what I faced in Toronto. I know what we faced in San Francisco when I literally had to run away from these Antifa trans activists who were chasing us down to assault us. And, there's just countless stories of this happening. And I think that the conversation is happening and that people have become aware that it's okay to have this conversation. I think that there was a complete block on the conversation for a long time. It was completely unacceptable to even say these words or to ask questions even about this ideology. And I think the conversation has opened up so much and people are becoming brave and unafraid. You can see it, all these people who showed up tonight. The venue was very supportive of us, which was amazing. We were really worried about being able to find a venue in Victoria that wouldn't cancel us, and we were super happy to find this venue, and we're super happy to hold more events at this venue.
Affirmation ignores trauma. The affirmation model is from how is this person presenting right now? And counselors who are being asked, what percentage of clients do you approve for transitioning? Under the affirmation model, they approve 100% of clients. One counselor said, it took me 2 years to approve one individual because they had so many emotional issues and challenges, but we eventually got them there, right? Under the assessment model, approximately 30% of people were approved. And I think that the fact that the manners in which the trauma I experienced influenced my being a female and being a woman and being pretty, they were ignored. They weren't explored. They weren't in any way exposed. I didn't look at and really understand that until after I had gotten into transition regret.
Now, as you know very well, you have your own cancel story, but the tide seems to be shifting a little bit in some areas, and now you've got a new position. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually, the fact that I was cancelled is a big part of why I got the job with Civilization Works. So it's a US think tank that was founded by Michael Schellenberger, building off of the work of his previous nonprofit, Environmental Progress, that broke the WPATH files. I actually saw a job posting when I was reading the WPATH files on their website, applied, and actually Meghan was my reference, so that helped. But, the fact that I was cancelled showed that I have courage and integrity, and those are the types of people that the parallel systems that are growing around us are looking for. So there really is opportunity if you're willing to stand in your principles.
It's power in numbers. And I, at the end of my speech, I said, we really have to get angry, but in a non-violent way, right? Meghan said the same thing. We need to use our voices. We see this in the States where that track runner, the parents are actually booing the runner, right, who won. 2 years ago, you didn't see that happening, right? With Leah Thomas winning the swim meet. There's a huge shift in energy now. Parents are getting angry. People have had enough, and we need to band arms. We need to block people from even going into the change rooms. Men, you need to start protecting your daughters. I don't care if you have to stop people going in from the locker rooms. You need to yell, you need to scream, you need to step up and protect your little girls. There's no way that I'm going to send my little 6-year-old niece in with a full-grown man. So, it's enough is enough. And the more you use your voice and stop this madness, the better.
At Rebel News, we don't back down from bringing you the other side of the story, even if that means there could be some violent counter-protesters trying to censor us from bringing out the truth. If you'd like to help keep our reporters safe, we have a special website called journalistdefensefund.com.